Timothy James Walz, WLZ, born April 6, 1964, is an American politician, former schoolteacher, and retired U.S. Army non-commissioned officer who has served as the 41st governor of Minnesota since 2019 and chair of the Democratic Governors Association since 2023. A member of the Democratic Party, he is its nominee for vice president in the 2024 United States presidential election. He was a member of the United States House of Representatives from 2007 to 2019, representing Minnesota's 1st Congressional District. Walz was born in West Point, Nebraska. He joined the Army National Guard and worked a blue-collar manufacturing job after high school. He later graduated with a teaching degree from Chadron State College in Nebraska before moving to Minnesota in 1996. Before running for Congress, he was a social studies teacher and football coach in the Mankato School District. He was elected to the United States House of Representatives for Minnesota's 1st Congressional District in 2006, defeating 6-term Republican incumbent Gil Gutnecht. He was re-elected 5 times, resigning in 2019 after being elected governor. Walz represented a large, mostly rural section of southern Minnesota, situated along the border with Iowa. Walz was elected governor of Minnesota in November 2018, defeating the Republican nominee, Hennepin County Commissioner Jeff Johnson. He was re-elected in 2022, defeating Republican nominee Scott Jensen. During his 2nd term, Walz pushed for and signed a wide range of legislation that included tax modifications, free school meals, bolstering state infrastructure, gun background checks, codifying abortion rights, and free college tuition for low-income families. On August 6, 2024, Vice President Kamala Harris announced her selection of Walz as her running mate in the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Early life and education. Timothy James Walz was born on April 6, 1964, in West Point, Nebraska, to Darlene Rose Raymond, a homemaker, and James F. Walz, a public school administrator. His great-grandfather John Friedrich Walz was a farmer and the son of German immigrant Sebastian Walz. Walz is a Lutheran. Both of Walz's parents are Catholics, but Walz is a Lutheran. Walz and his 3 siblings grew up in Valentine, Nebraska, a rural community near the South Dakota border in the northern part of the state. While Walz was in high school, his father was diagnosed with lung cancer. His family moved to Butte, Nebraska, in his sophomore year to be closer to his parents' relatives. Walz graduated from Butte High School in 1982 with a class of 25 students. In January 1984, his father died. In 1989, he earned a Bachelor of Science in Social Science Education from Chadron State College. Walz earned a Master of Science in Educational Leadership from Minnesota State University, Mankato, in 2001. Early career teaching. After high school, Walz worked in manufacturing and served in the Army National Guard. He subsequently went to college to get a teaching degree like his father. After graduating from Chadron State College, he accepted a teaching position for a year with World Teach in China. After returning, Walz took
a job teaching and coaching in Alliance, Nebraska, where he met his wife, Gwen Whipple, a fellow teacher. He and Gwen married in 1994 and moved 2 years later to Mankato in Minnesota, his wife's home state, where he worked as a geography teacher and coach at Mankato West High School. He coached the football team to its first state championship in 1999. In 1999, Walz agreed to be the faculty advisor of the first Gay-Straight Alliance at Mankato West High School. Walz and his wife also ran Educational Travel Adventures, which organized summer educational trips for high school students to China. Military service. With his father's encouragement, Walz enlisted in the Army National Guard when he turned 17. His father had served in the Korean War and paid for his education degree with the GI Bill and wanted his son to have the same opportunity. Walz served in the National Guard for 24 years after enlisting in 1981. During his military career, he had postings in Arkansas, Texas, the Arctic Circle, New Ulm, Minnesota, and elsewhere. He trained in heavy artillery. During his service, he worked in disaster response postings following floods and tornadoes and was deployed overseas on active duty for months. In 1989, he earned the title of Nebraska Citizen Soldier of the Year. He was deployed post 9/11 for half a year to Europe to support Operation Enduring Freedom. His decorations included the Army Commendation Medal and 2 Army Achievement Medals. Walz attained the rank of Command Sergeant Major near the end of his service, but retired as a Master Sergeant in 2005 for benefit purposes because he did not complete coursework at the U.S. Army Sergeants Major Academy. Political involvement. Walz volunteered for John Kerry's 2004 presidential campaign. He was inspired to volunteer in the presidential election after he took a group of students to a George W. Bush rally in Mankato and was angered by the security team's questioning of his students' politics after they saw a Kerry sticker on a student's wallet. He was appointed the Kerry campaign's coordinator for his county, as well as a district coordinator of Vets for Kerry. In 2005, Walz completed the 2.5-day campaigns and elections crash course at Camp Wellstone, a program run by Wellstone Action, the nonprofit organization Mark and David Wellstone created to carry on the work of their parents, Paul Wellstone and Sheila Wellstone. U.S. House of Representatives. Walz announced his candidacy for Congress in 2006. He had no opponent for the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, DFL, nomination in the September 12 primary election. He beat incumbent Republican Gil Gutknecht in the general election on November 7. After the election, Politico described Gutknecht as having been caught off guard, and Walz as having resolved never to get caught like that himself. He packaged himself as a moderate from day one, built an office centered on constituent service, and carved out a niche as a tireless advocate for veterans. Upon his swearing-in, Walz became the highest-ranking retired
enlisted soldier ever to serve in Congress, as well as only the fourth Democrat DFLer to represent his district. The others were Thomas Wilson, 1887 to 1889, William Harries, 1891 to 1893, and Tim Penny, 1983 to 1995. In his first month in Congress, Walz was appointed to the Committee on Veterans Affairs, the Agriculture Committee, and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Speaker Nancy Pelosi had issued a special waiver that exempted him from the order that barred most freshman members of Congress from serving on more than 2 committees. That same year, he was appointed to the Armed Services Committee where, along with fellow Minnesota Democrat Keith Ellison, he opposed President Bush's plan to increase troop levels in Iraq. In his first week as a legislator, Walz co-sponsored a bill to raise the minimum wage, voted for stem cell research, voted to allow Medicare to negotiate pharmaceutical prices, and voiced support for pay-as-you-go budget rules, requiring that new spending or tax changes not add to the federal deficit. Even as he represented a district that had usually voted Republican, pundits described Walz's policy positions as ranging from moderate to progressive. He voted to advance the Affordable Care Act out of the House. As a congressman, he also met with the Dalai Lama and served on a commission monitoring human rights in China. Walz was re-elected in 2008 with 62% of the vote, becoming only the second non-Republican to win a second full term in the district. He won a third term in 2010, defeating State Representative Randy Demmer with 50% of the vote. He was re-elected again in 2012, 2014, and 2016. Walz received a 100% rating from Planned Parenthood in 2012, from the American Civil Liberties Union in 2011, from the American Immigration Lawyers Association in 2009 to 2010, from the AFL-CIO in 2010, from the International Brotherhood of Teamsters in 2009 to 2010, and from the National Organization for Women in 2007. He also received single-digit ratings from the National Taxpayers Union, Citizens Against Government Waste, Americans for Tax Reform, and FreedomWorks. The United States Chamber of Commerce gave him a 25% rating in 2010. Walz was ranked the 7th most bipartisan House member during the 114th Congress and the most bipartisan member from Minnesota in the Bipartisan Index created by the Lugar Center and the McCourt School of Public Policy, which ranks members of Congress by measuring how often their bills attract co-sponsors from the opposite party and how often they co-sponsor bills by members of the opposite party. Committee assignments: Committee on Agriculture, Agriculture Subcommittee on Forestry, Agriculture Subcommittee on Commodity Markets, Digital Assets, and Rural Development, Committee on Veterans Affairs, Ranking Member, 115th Congress, Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, Armed Services Committee. Caucus memberships: Chair, Congressional EMS Caucus, Co-Chair, National Guard and Reserve Component Caucus, Co-Chair, Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, Co-Chair, Congressional Veterans Jobs Caucus, Member, LGBT Equality Caucus Member, Congressional Arts Caucus Commissions, Congressional Executive Commission on China, Governor of Minnesota. Elections 2018. Walz announced he would
run for governor after Mark Dayton, the incumbent Democratic governor, chose not to seek a third term. On November 6, 2018, Walz was elected governor, defeating the Republican nominee, Hennepin County Commissioner Jeff Johnson. During the campaign, 2 senior retired NCOs of the Minnesota National Guard falsely accused Walz of fabricating facts about his service and lying about his military rank. The allegation about his military rank was debunked. 2022, Walz sought re-election in 2022. He won the August 9th Democratic primary and faced Republican nominee Scott Jensen in the November general election. On November 8, 2022, Walz defeated Jensen 52.3% to 44.6%. Though Jensen fared better than Walz's opponent had in 2018 and made gains against Walz in Greater Minnesota, he did not overcome Walz's lead in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area. Tenure Walz was sworn in as governor of Minnesota on January 7, 2019, at the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul. Walz took the oath of office alongside incoming Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon, Minnesota State Auditor Julie Blaha, and Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, all Democrats. Walz spoke about education and healthcare reform in his inauguration speech. Police reform and protest response. On May 26, 2020, the day after the murder of George Floyd, Walz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan demanded justice and called the video of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck disturbing. Walz elaborated, "The lack of humanity in this disturbing video is sickening. We will get answers and seek justice." Walz's initial response to the widespread protests following Floyd's murder was criticized by political opponents and other groups. He later responded to the murder by ordering the Minnesota legislature to reconvene for special sessions on legislation for police reform and accountability. After police reform failed to pass the first special session in June, a second special session was held in July. On July 21st, the legislature passed major police reform legislation. The new compromise law included a limited ban on police from using chokeholds so long as the officers are not at greater risk. It banned the old warrior training program, which was regarded as dehumanizing people and encouraging aggressive conduct. It required training peace officers to deal with people with autism or in a mental health crisis, and de-escalation training for situations that could turn volatile. It also created a special independent unit at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension for investigations of fatal police encounters and a Community Relations Advisory Council to consult with the Police Officers Standards and Training Board on policy changes. Walz signed the legislation into law on July 23, 2020. NPEC. On May 24, 2023, Walz signed an omnibus appropriations bill into law that included a section that adjoined Minnesota to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. 2023 Legislative Session. The 93rd Minnesota Legislature, in session from January to May 2023, was the first legislature to be fully Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party controlled since the 88th Minnesota Legislature in 2013-2015. It passed
several major reforms to Minnesota law, including requiring paid leave, banning non-compete agreements, cannabis legalization, increased spending on infrastructure and environmental issues, tax modifications, codifying abortion rights, universal free school meals, and universal gun background checks. The Star-Tribune called the session one of the most consequential ever in Minnesota. Walz called it the most productive session in Minnesota history. While Walz signed almost all legislation passed by the legislature, he vetoed a bill intended to increase pay for rideshare drivers, his first veto as governor, saying that it did not strike the right balance. 2024 and Feeding Our Future fraud scheme. In June 2024, 5 employees of Minnesota-based nonprofit Feeding Our Future were convicted of perpetrating the nation's largest COVID-related fraud scheme, valued at $250 million. A Minnesota state audit report that criticized the Walz administration's handling of the matter revealed that the Minnesota Department of Education failed to oversee the nonprofit and perform its due diligence, which Walz admits and has taken responsibility for. 2024 Vice Presidential Campaign. On July 22, 2024, Walz endorsed Vice President Harris following incumbent President Joe Biden's withdrawal from the 2024 presidential race. Walz quickly made Harris's reported shortlist for vice president, and on August 6, 2024, Harris officially selected Walz as her running mate. This followed a selection process in which Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro were also reported to be on the Harris campaign's shortlist prior to Walz's selection. Walz is credited with coining the descriptor "weird" for Donald Trump and other Republicans. The term subsequently became a popular meme, especially with young people, and saw widespread use by Democrats. Political positions. Cannabis. Walz advocated for the legalization of recreational cannabis as governor of Minnesota. As a candidate for governor in 2017, he said, "We have an opportunity in Minnesota to replace the current failed policy with one that creates tax revenue, grows jobs, builds opportunities for Minnesotans, protects Minnesota kids, and trusts adults to make personal decisions based on their personal freedoms." In 2022, he proposed the creation of a cannabis management office to develop and implement the regulatory framework for adult-use cannabis. In Minnesota, on May 30, 2023, he signed into law House File 100 to legalize recreational cannabis in Minnesota, which went into effect on August 1, 2023. Economic issues. During the economic crisis in 2008, Walz repeatedly spoke out against using taxpayer money to bail out financial institutions. In late September, he voted against the $700 billion TARP bill, which purchased troubled assets from these institutions. Walz released a statement after the bill's passage, saying, "The bill we voted on today passes the buck when it comes to recouping the losses taxpayers might suffer. I also regret that this bill does not do enough to help average homeowners or provide sufficient oversight of Wall Street." For the same reasons, in December 2008, he voted against the bill that offered $14 billion in government loans to bail out the country's large automobile manufacturers. In June 2009, Walz introduced a bipartisan resolution calling on the federal government to relinquish its temporary ownership interests in the General Motors Company and the Chrysler Group LLC as soon as possible, and stated that the government must not be involved in those companies' management decisions. Despite his votes against bailout bills that loaned taxpayer money to large banks and auto manufacturers, Walz did vote with his Democratic colleagues to support the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. As a member of the House Transportation Committee, Walz saw the stimulus bill as an opportunity to work with his congressional colleagues to make job creation through investment in public infrastructure, like roads, bridges, and clean energy the cornerstone of the economic recovery plan. Walz has focused heavily on job and economic issues important to his southern Minnesota district, which has a mix of larger employers like the Mayo Clinic, along with small businesses and agricultural interests. In July 2009, he voted for the Enhancing Small Business Research and Innovation Act, which he described as part of our long-term economic blueprint to spur job creation by encouraging America's entrepreneurs to innovate toward breakthrough technological advancements. Walz also urged assistance for hog and dairy farmers who struggled with lower prices for their commodities in 2008 and 2009. Education. Walz was a public school teacher for 20 years. He opposes using merit pay for teachers. Voting in favor of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, Walz pointed to its strong provisions in support of public school buildings. He is on record supporting legislation to lower tuition costs. In a February 12, 2009 speech, he said that the most important thing to do to ensure a solid base for America's economic future is to provide the best education possible for American children. Walz has received strong backing for these policies from many interest groups, including the National Education Association, the American Association of University Women, and the National Association of Elementary School Principals. Guns. While in Congress, Walz was a strong supporter of gun rights and was endorsed by the NRA Political Victory Fund, NRA PVF, multiple times, receiving an A grade from the organization. Following the Parkland High School shooting in 2018, he denounced the NRA in a Star Tribune opinion piece and announced that he would donate the equivalent of all of the campaign contributions the NRA PVF had given him, $18,000, to the Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund. As governor, Walz expressed support for gun regulation. In 2023, he signed into law a public safety bill that establishes universal background checks and red flag laws in Minnesota. Israel-Hamas war. Walz condemned Hamas's October 7th attacks in Israel and ordered flags to be lowered to half-mast in the following days. After the 2024 Minnesota Democratic presidential primary, in which 19% of voters cast uncommitted ballots, Walz took a sympathetic view toward those doing so to protest President Biden's handling of the war
in Gaza, calling them civically engaged. Of the protests against U.S. funding of the war in Gaza, Walz said, "This issue is a humanitarian crisis. They have every right to be heard. These folks are asking for a change in course. They're asking for more pressure to be put on. You can hold competing things. That Israel has the right to defend itself, and the atrocities of October 7th are unacceptable, but Palestinian civilians being caught in this has got to end." Walz also said he supports a ceasefire in Gaza. Labor and workers' rights. In 2023, Walz signed a law banning captive audience meetings and non-compete clauses. The law also mandated paid sick leave for employees and increased safety inspections, as well as ergonomics requirements to reduce the risk of repetitive strain injuries for warehouse, meatpacking, and healthcare facility workers. The law also granted construction workers stronger protections against wage theft. LGBT rights. Walz supports LGBTQ rights, including federal anti-discrimination laws on the basis of sexual orientation. In a 2009 speech, he called for an end to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Walz voted in favor of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act and the Sexual Orientation Employment Non-Discrimination Act. In 2007, he received a 90% grade from the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBT rights organization. In 2011, Walz announced his support for the Respect for Marriage Act. As governor, Walz has signed a number of bills that support the LGBTQ community. In 2023, he signed a bill that banned the practice of conversion therapy and another that protected gender-affirming care in Minnesota. Veterans. Issues. Having served 24 years in the Army National Guard, as a freshman in Congress, Walz was given a rare third committee membership when he was assigned to the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Walz has championed enhanced veterans benefits since taking office in 2007. In May of that year, the House unanimously passed his Traumatic Brain Injuries Center Act to set up 5 centers around the nation to study traumatic brain injuries and develop improved models for caring for veterans suffering from such injuries. Walz also supported the GI Bill of 2008, which expanded education benefits for veterans and in some cases allowed them to transfer education benefits to family members. In 2009, Walz gave the keynote address at the American Legion National Convention in Louisville. He spoke about the need for the VA and Department of Defense to work together to make sure that returning servicemen and women do not fall through the cracks when they transition to civilian life. Walz was the lead House sponsor of the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention for American Veterans Act, which directs the Veterans Administration to report on veteran mental health care and suicide prevention programs. It also gives the VA permission to provide incentives to psychiatrists who agree to join the VA medical system. In 2018, Walz introduced a bill that would amend the Internal Revenue Code
of 1986 to allow for a tax credit for employees who are deployed in the military. Women's issues, Walz supports abortion rights and has a 100% rating from Planned Parenthood. The National Right to Life Committee gave him a rating of 0. In early 2009, Walz voted for the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Personal life, Walz and his wife, Gwen, born 1966, married in 1994. For 7 years, the family underwent fertility treatment before their eldest daughter, Hope, was born. They lived in Mankato, Minnesota, for nearly 20 years, before moving to St. Paul with their 2 children upon his election as governor. Walz is a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. In 1995, he was arrested on a driving under the influence charge. He pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of reckless driving, and his driver's license was suspended for 90 days. He has been a teetotaler ever since. Walz's brother Craig died after being hit by a falling tree during a storm in 2016. Craig was survived by his wife and their son, who suffered severe injuries. Walz owns a restored International Scout and a dog, also named Scout. Electoral history. See also, United States congressional delegations from Minnesota. List of United States representatives from Minnesota references. Further reading, 55 Things to Know About Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's Pick for VP, August 6, 2024. Politico external links. Official website of Harris-Walz campaign. Governor Tim Walz official government website. Biography at the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress. Financial information, federal office at the Federal Election Commission. Legislation sponsored at the Library of Congress. Profile at VoteSmart.